Today I am cooking pork in tomatillo. Now before you click out, I've got a lot of things to share, and I want to teach you a lot about how to cook pork chops so that they're juicy and tender. So I'm going to go through that part of it. Pork in tomatillo is like one of the most classic things, especially in central Mexico. Everybody makes it. You've seen me make it many different times, but I've got a slightly different approach, and this time it's going to include cactus. Now again, before you click out of this, I am on a mission to get everybody comfortable working with cactus paddles. If you live near a Mexican grocery store, you can buy them already cleaned or cleaned and chopped up even. We're gonna roast these guys whole today, but I just wanna make it an easy thing for people so that it just doesn't look like something desperate that you're cooking these cactus paddles. Okay, so let's start with the pork first, because typically this is a stew. You'd buy some pork shoulder, cube it up, brown it or not, cook it or braise it in the tomatillo sauce, and then eat it. Maybe there'd be some chunks of potato in there. But what we're going to do today is a much more sort of company-worthy approach to making this dish, and we're going to do pork chops. So I've got a couple of different styles here. Thicknesses really is all it is. This would be your regular rib chop, and I would say that if you're probably cooking for a nice meal, you're going to use a rib chop. This is what would be your pork loin here in the middle of these guys. But there are two different thicknesses, and lots of butchers do this. This one is almost an inch and a half thick and weighs about a pound. So boy, you're going to be doing this for a big celebration. But the other one here, that's only 3/4 of an inch thick and weighs about a half a pound. So it's a much more sort of average size portion. Of course, these all have bone in because that's what I want to cook today. The flavor's better when you're cooking bone in, and also the flavor of that bone will get into the sauce, making it richer and definitely more delicious. Okay, so let's talk about brining pork. And I'm gonna make my brine over here. First thing that I gotta do is run very hot tap water. And when this gets very hot, I'm gonna put a quart of it into a 2-quart measure here. And then I've got measured amounts of salt and sugar. So I've got a 1/2 cup of salt that's gonna go in there. Don't worry, it's not going to be a salty dish. You have to have that concentration of salt to make the brining work. And then I always like to add a little sugar to the brine. Not everybody does, but I'm going to put 1/4 cup of sugar in there. And then with that hot water, things will dissolve more readily. So we'll stir it until we've seen most of that dissolve. And then we're going to fill up this 8-cup measure with cold water, which will bring the brine to about room temperature at that point. The hot water just facilitates the dissolving of the salt and the sugar here. So let's get this on really cold. Yep. And fill that up. And now it is off to brine the pork. Okay, slide these into, you don't want to use aluminum for this, but into like a 9x13 baking dish. I'm going to do 2 of the thin ones and 2 of the thick ones to show you what that's like, so that you have seen it all. But let's talk about what brining does here. Certainly it seasons the meat, so it'll make it taste really delicious all the way through rather than just some salt on the surface. But the other thing that it does is, by this sort of osmosis of this salty liquid coming into the pork, it will denature the protein that's in there, allowing it to retain a whole lot more moisture. You know, you've probably seen a steak or something in a pan where it seizes up and it just pushes all the moisture out. Well, this brining process will mean that we can get a good sear on it without it doing that. It'll retain a lot more moisture. Now, if we left this in a brine for several days, you'd have ham. That's just fully brined pork leg usually. Okay, so I'll pour our salt and sugar mixture here. They need to be completely covered. That's about right. I've filled this up. Now, timing is important here because we're doing a strong brine on this. So for these small or thin ones of the pork chops, it's going to take 30 minutes here. So definitely set a timer for that. And the bigger ones, 1 hour, because it'll take double the amount of time. And now we're going to set this to the side. You could put this into the refrigerator if you wanted to, or leave it on the countertop if you're continuing on with your baking. It will be fine right there. Now let's talk about getting everything ready here for our sauce. So I like roasted tomatillos rather than boiled tomatillos. So we're going to roast the tomatillos, but we're going to roast a little bit of everything here for this sauce. And this will be sort of, I'm just trying to make it, when I'm cooking by myself at home, I just try to make everything really simple. Of course, with the tomatillos, you got to take the papery husks off of those guys. And so we'll sort of line those up there. And then we'll put we have to talk about these poblanos, because I'm not going to use serranos for this. I want a lot of green chili flavor here. So cut them in quarters, and we'll roast them right alongside the poblanos. That'll make everything really easy. But take the seed pod out and all of the seeds out, and then you just kind of have to press them flat like that. And we need about half of this onion. So I'm going to cut it into smallish pieces here. And we'll just make room so that we can roast everything here together. And we'll just lay these guys up here. And then we're on now to the cactus. As I said, some Mexican groceries will sell this cactus already cleaned, but it's really not hard to do at all. Some people will wear gloves to do this with. I actually prefer to just do it with a pair of tongs. So here's the steps. You cut off this thick end down here where this paddle connected to the plant, then cut all the way around the outside of it. Like that. That'll eliminate all of the little spines that were on the edges. And then holding your knife perpendicular to the cactus paddle, just start scraping off the nodes and then flip it around. Do the other side. At the end of this part, you do want to kind of go back and look and make sure that all the nodes have been scraped off. Okay, let's get this guy situated up here. Maybe this is going to be a kind of crowded sheet here. Now, the only thing that I'm going to oil before we start the broiling process is the cactus. And I'm going to drizzle it with a little bit of olive oil and then just brush that over, flip them, and then do the other side. These will do much better if they are oiled. So a little drizzle, and then off we go. Then we're going to put them under the broiler and check them in about 6 or 7 minutes. I'll show you what that's going to look like. It's been about 7 minutes now, and I've been looking at them just to see what's going on here, but let's look and see which ones are ready now. I will say that all of these poblanos are ready to come out. You see how blistered and blackened the skins are? So let's pull those guys off. And then this one cactus paddle is beautiful. Look, it's olive colored, and it's completely limp, and it's nicely browned on that, but this one didn't get that way, so I'm gonna leave that one on there. This onion could use a little bit more. Those tomatillos I know could use a little bit more. I'm feeling the garlic, and it's still firm enough. It's got a little give to it, but it's still firm enough that I'm gonna just put this back in, and we'll look at it again in a couple more minutes to see how that's all coming along. All right, while that's broiling and finishing up in the oven there, let's just look at these poblanos. So as they cool off, it's really easy to pull the skin off of them, and that's what I'm interested in doing, is just to get it all off. They're still pretty hot, but as you can let them cool down a little bit more and then peel off all of the blackened skin. I think we're in pretty good shape here. Let's just set this thing over here. And we've got this. It's still a little bit shy, I think. I can tell that this garlic is cooked through. I'm going to go directly into the blender jar with the tomatillos. And did you notice that I did put a silicone mat down here? That can really help you with cleanup. Or perhaps a piece of foil if that's your thing. I like the reusable silicone mats a lot. So we'll put those guys in there. And then we just got to let the cactus paddles cool off completely before we dice them, but they're going to go into the dish at the very end. So I've just got to peel this garlic now. Okay, this peeled garlic can go into the blender. We can actually go ahead and blend this mixture right now. So it's ready when we're ready to braise the pork in it. So I want kind of a medium smooth puree, not too fine. I want a little texture in there. Okay, that should do it there. We'll just leave that sit there. I'll get rid of these poblanos. They're going to go in at the end as well with the cactus that we have roasted here. And clean up this, because we're ready to talk about pork and the searing of the pork and then the braising of the pork. But I have taken the pork out of the brine at the appropriate times, a half hour for the thin and a full hour for the thick ones. And they're right here in front of me. But you do really have to work on, I've got paper towels stuck to them. You do have to get them really, really dry, because our next step is to brown them, and they won't brown if they're at all moist. Okay, so we've got them set up there. You can brown in vegetable oil, olive oil, or fresh rendered pork lard. You can probably guess what I'm going to do, and I will tell you that if you use the pork lard, since we're using a pork dish here, if you're using the pork lard for this, you will get the most beautiful crust, better than oil on it. And I say that from a lot of experience. So we want enough of this pork lard, and this is the good stuff, the kind that you would buy in a Mexican grocery store back by the meat counter. I've heated this cast iron pan. A 12-inch cast iron pan is my go-to pretty much everyday cooking because it holds heat really beautifully. It distributes the heat beautifully, and it'll give you a really nice crust. So I've heated the pan. It does heat up very slowly, so you need to put it on about 5 minutes before you want to use it. And that's exactly what I did here. I've got it on a medium high, and now I'm seeing just a wisp of smoke coming up from that. That's what I want to see there. Let's make sure that all of these sides are beautifully dry, no moisture on there. And I'm going to put them in there, and literally 3 minutes or something like that will be the right amount of time. And I have to kind of mush them around in here to get them to fit. But usually 4 rib chops will fit in this kind of a And we'll see at about 3 minutes, I think they'll get a nice crust on them. You'll notice, however, that, boy, there's a difference in the thickness, which is going to translate into a difference in the timing here. Not about the crusting on the outside, the browning on the outside, but a lot on the braising time. But we'll talk about that when we add our sauce to this pan. Okay, let's take a look at what these are like. Nice amount of brown. For this, that's about the right amount for me. I don't want to go much browner than that because I don't need to, because I'm going to do some other, yeah, this is all looking really nice. Yeah, nice golden brown on this. We'll brown the other side. And then I have a quarter sheet pan with a rack on it over here that I'm going to take everything out to. The rack is important to me because if you put it on a rack, it won't lose a lot of moisture out. If you put it directly on the sheet pan, it'll just, you'll notice you'll come back to it and it'll be in a pool of kind of juices, meat juices that should be in the meat. Okay, these are looking really nice now. Guess I should take the thinner ones out first. Now, at this point, the thin ones, you may say, it's got to be done by now, and they basically are. So we are going to do a little bit of braising in the liquid, but just to heat them through, basically, whereas the bigger chops here are going to actually be finishing their cooking. Now, in this pan with all those delicious juices there, we can put the mixture that we pureed here with the roasted tomatillos and garlic and onions into the same pan. I like it to go into the hot pan like that because it will sort of sear the sauce. Flavors will come together and you'll increase the sweetness in this mixture. And we'll stir it for a couple of minutes as it reduces here. If you happen to have a cast iron pan that is enamel coated, like the famous French brand Le Creuset, that's a good thing to be cooking in here as well. So we'll put these guys over there. And while that mixture is cooking down a little bit, thickening up, let's take a look at the cactus paddles here. So they have to be completely cool to take this next step with them because they have this substance on the inside. It's a mucilaginous substance, and you want that to kind of be all reabsorbed in there so that it doesn't sort of come out on your countertop. But once you cool off cooked cactus, it won't have that anymore. And I'm going to cut it into about 1/2-inch pieces so it'll be ready to go into the mixture when we're braising there. So now this has sort of gotten to a place where it's reduced a little bit. I was looking for my spatula here, but it's thickened up quite a lot. So we will put in it now a couple of cups of chicken broth. I would say chicken or pork broth could work for this. But who has pork broth around and you can't buy it in the grocery store, so I usually work with chicken broth for this. And then we want to put the herb in there that we're going to be working with. This one is epazote because I'm working in a very traditional way. If you were using cilantro for this, I would have blended it with the sauce base there. But I'm just going to put a couple of big sprigs in the very traditional way of cooking in central Mexico, a couple of big sprigs of epazote here in the pot. And then we can scrape in the poblanos. And that was a lot of poblanos, which I like it. And it'll give you a slightly different, if you've only had this pork in tomatillo with serranos or jalapenos in it, this will give you a different approach to it in flavor, which I think is really delicious. We can now put our roasted cactus in there. I use the same technique for grilling cactus, just to clean them and then put them, brush them with a little bit of oil. For those, I usually sprinkle them with a little bit of salt and then put them on the grill and grill them until they look just like that. And now we have our salt going in here. So we want to season this nicely, but not over season it, because remember, our pork is already seasoned. So we will salt it, and then I'm going to give it a little taste here. I think we got a nice balance of flavors going on there. Now, as soon as this comes to a simmer, I mean to a real full-on simmer, not just little bubbles coming around the edge, but a full-on simmer right in the middle of this, I'm going to reduce the heat to what I would call a bare simmer. So I just want to see tiny little bit. Now I'm seeing some bubbles coming in the middle. I want to see a tiny, tiny little bit of movement. So as we want to cook this, or finish cooking this pork in a very, very gentle way. That's what pork really wants, I think. It's the best pork is always the most slowly cooked pork. Okay, so I'm turning it down now. I can turn it way down. And now I'm going to slide these guys in. But I'm only going to put in the big ones here. And then I need to cover this. I don't really have a cover for this particular skillet, so I use a half sheet pan on it all the time. And then we're going to set the timer for 5 minutes and then flip them over. And at that time, we'll slide these guys in there and just let them coast to complete doneness and rewarming. It's been about 5 minutes now, so we'll slide the thinner ones in now, and they'll be completely submerged, but of course the bigger ones we're going to want to turn over so that they cook evenly. And keeping that temperature really low. It was bubbling a little more than I wanted it to when I actually took the top of it off, so I've got it on the lowest temperature I can keep it on now. And then we'll come back, and at that time, we'll start testing. I have a digital thermometer, which I swear by. It's such a great piece of equipment, and now they're very readily available and not very expensive, but it can set your mind at ease because you know what temperature the pork is. I'm going for someplace around 150 on this. It's a little hard to judge because the temperature will be different by the bone versus at the edge. So we'll kind of go in the middle and look for about a 150, and then we're ready to serve. Uncover this guy. I'll tell you, it smells so good. I wish you could smell it. One of the big frustrations for me is that I can't share the smells and the tastes with you. I'm not going to necessarily go in to the thin ones because I know that the thin ones are going to have are going to be ready. So I'm going to go kind of into the middle of this guy here. Well, that's saying that it's hotter than that. Yeah. So we've got, it's plenty done now. Now, if you're one of those people that thinks that pork has to be cooked until it's completely dry and dead, I'm going to invite you into the 21st century. Even the U.S. Department of Agriculture of the United States here says that you only need to cook pork to 145 degrees, which is pink in the center. So I'm going to show you kind of nice. If you're going to do this dish, you're probably doing it for company, something really special. So I'm going to show you a beautiful way to present it. You've got a bone in here, so you have to kind of cut around that bone, and it'll always be pinker at the bone, just know that. So we'll cut like that. And then I'm going to slice this crosswise on an angle, like that. Now, just look at that pork. It's juicy, It's just that gorgeous hint of pink. I love this tomatillo sauce with potatoes. So I made some rustic mashed potatoes that I'm going to use on this plate here, meaning that they're little boiling potatoes that were not peeled and then mashed with butter and cream. Then I'm going to put the bone of this just right up against that. And with a little ladle here, I will transfer some of this braising tomatillo sauce to the plate here. A couple of ladles full of that will look really pretty there. And then lay the pork here up against the bone so that, I mean, this is a real restaurant-y kind of approach to doing your presentation. Look how pretty that is there. Okay, now I like this sauce so much that I would take some of it and just drizzle it over the top of it. Since I used epazote for this, why not take a couple of epazote leaves and just nestle those guys right down in there for a beautiful contrast in color. And there you have a very elegant version of the pork and tomatillo that is such a classic and certainly one of my favorite dishes of all time.